They said law died with Sheriff Clay Reynolds, that Dry Creek would crumble, its people ruled by fear, its streets forever shadowed by the outlaws who pulled the trigger that day. And for a while they were right. The widow, Terry Reynolds, stayed silent behind her curtains. Crow's gang owned the saloon, the streets, and the souls of those too frightened to speak. But grief has a way of changing shape. It twists, hardens, sharpens, and when no one else dared, when every man lowered his eyes and every door stayed shut, Terry Reynolds pinned on the badge her husband once wore. She wasn't the fastest gun, she wasn't the loudest voice, but she became something Dry Creek couldn't live without. Justice. And when the time came, she didn't ask for permission. She took the badge, and she never gave it back. Clay Reynolds died just past noon, under the blazing sun that hung heavy above Dry Creek like a watching God too cruel to intervene. It happened so fast that no one understood what they had witnessed until the sound of gunfire stopped echoing between the dusty clapboard buildings. Jasper Crow, wearing that snake's grin, stood over Clay's body with his revolver still smoking. His men spread out across Main Street like dark stains on the earth. No one rushed forward. No one dared. Terry Reynolds stood frozen in front of the tailor's shop, her sewing basket clutched so tight against her waist that the handle snapped in her hand. She didn't run to Clay. She didn't scream. Her legs wouldn't move. Her throat locked up tight. When Crow holstered his gun and sauntered into the saloon, life in Dry Creek broke. It wasn't a town anymore. It was prey. The funeral came 2 days later. It wasn't much. The preacher said the usual words, but his voice trembled. Only a handful of people dared to attend. Ezra Pike, the old blacksmith, Lena Watts, the schoolteacher, a few others who either didn't care about fear or were too proud to let terror turn them into ghosts. Terror didn't cry at the gravesite. She didn't make a speech. She simply stood, her black veil hiding her expression as the coffin lowered into the dirt. Crow's men watched from a distance, hats low, hands resting on gun grips. Wade Briggs, Crow's right-hand devil, spat chewing tobacco near the church steps and smiled wide, daring anyone to look offended. No one did. When the preacher ended the prayer, the mourners scattered like dry leaves on a windy day. Terror stayed a while longer. The sun beat down mercilessly, but she didn't flinch. Only when the sky turned the color of bruised peaches did she walk home. The weeks that followed stripped Dry Creek of whatever dignity it had left. Crow's men took over the saloon first. They drank for free, wrecked furniture, and tossed out the regulars. The town council, men who once spoke big in Sunday meetings, said nothing. Next came the general store. Tax, they called it. Protection money in truth. Milo and Clara Talbot refused to pay. The next morning, their barn burned to the ground. The Talbots paid double the following day, eyes downcast. The school shut down. Lena Watts could no longer promise the children would be safe. Families began leaving. Wagons rolled out silently before dawn, leaving empty homes and dreams behind. Dry Creek became a husk, and Terry Reynolds stayed in her house, curtains drawn, black dresses her only wardrobe. She became a shadow on her own land, her grief mixing with quiet rage until they became one and the same. But it wasn't Crow's cruelty that snapped her. It was Eli Turner. 16 years old, more brave than wise. When Crow's men tried to take his family's last hens, Eli stood tall in the middle of Main Street. "They ain't yours," he spat. Wade Briggs beat him bloody right there. He knocked Eli down, kicked him twice, and spit on him while the townsfolk watched from behind, cracked doors and drawn curtains. Terry saw it all. She didn't run out screaming, didn't pull a rifle. She simply watched, hands gripping her teacup until it shattered in her grasp. When Wade dragged Eli away, leaving him broken in the dust, something inside Terry Reynolds twisted into shape. Not grief, not fear, steel. That night she didn't sleep. She sat at Clay's desk, lit only by a single oil lamp. Her fingers traced the outline of his badge, the star that once meant something. It was cold, heavy, and yet, when she pinned it to her chest in the small hours before dawn, it felt right. She strapped Clay's revolver to her hip, tied low like he wore it. She pulled her hair back tight. She didn't bother with a dress. Instead, she wore riding pants, boots, and a dark coat. When the sun crested the eastern ridge, Terry stepped outside, and Dry Creek noticed. The butcher paused, cleaver mid-swing. Lena Watts gasped audibly. Ezra Pike tipped his hat slowly, almost reverently. For the first time since Clay fell, there was movement in the wind. She walked straight down Main Street toward the saloon. Her boots clapped hard against the boards, badge glinting in the morning light. Crow wasn't there. He slept late. But Wade Briggs and 6 others lounged outside, playing cards and drinking. Wade saw her first. "Well, well," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "The widow comes to cry." Tara didn't stop. She walked right up to them. "You have until sundown," she said calmly. "Every one of you rides out a dry creek by then, or you'll wish you had." Silence, then laughter, harsh and cruel. Wade slapped his knee and leaned back in his chair, almost falling over. "Go home, Tara," he said with a mocking grin. "Morning's messed with your head." She didn't flinch, didn't blink. "You've been warned." And with that, she turned and walked away. Behind her, more laughter followed. But beneath it, something else stirred. People peeked from windows. The undertaker stood frozen on his step. Ezra Pike rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. Tara didn't need them to believe just yet. But Dry Creek had seen the first spark, and by sundown, they'd know the widow wasn't asking anymore. She was telling. Sundown came with no miracles. Dry Creek waited, breath held tight, as the orange light slipped behind the jagged ridges that framed the west end of town. No horses saddled up, no boots rode out. Crow's men stayed. They stayed and laughed, stayed and drank, stayed and made it clear that the widow's warning had meant nothing. Tara Reynolds sat alone on her porch, shotgun across her lap, watching them. The townsfolk watched her, some from behind curtains, others just from the corners of their eyes as they locked up their shops earlier than usual. She didn't look afraid, but deep inside, fear and fury tangled together like fighting snakes. At midnight, Dry Creek's punishment came. Tara was jolted awake by screams, by orange light flickering against her bedroom wall, by the unmistakable crackle of burning timber. She threw open her door. The mercantile, the heart of Dry Creek, was on fire. The flames roared high into the night sky, snapping and whipping like wild beasts tearing at the walls. Wade Briggs and Crow's men stood across the street, silhouetted by the inferno, laughing like devils while townsfolk cowered at their windows. Terry didn't hesitate. She ran barefoot into the chaos, grabbed the nearest bucket, and raced for the well. Water, bucket, run, throw, again and again. Her arms screamed, her eyes burned, but she didn't stop. At first she was alone. Then Ezra Pike appeared, hauling a barrel in his massive arms. Wordless, grim-faced, he dumped it at the base of the flames and went back for more. Next came Lena Watts, still in her nightgown, shielding her face with her sleeve as she helped Terry haul water. The preacher came, Samuel Crick, the barber. Even young Tommy Voss, who couldn't have been more than 12, ran back and forth with buckets as the fire hissed and spat. By dawn, the mercantile still stood, charred, blackened, but alive, just like Dry Creek. The townsfolk stood together in the muddy street, breathless and filthy, watching the last embers die out. No one spoke. No one knew what to say, so Tara did. "This is law," she said simply, voice raw from smoke and fury. She raised Clay's badge high enough for them all to see. Not them, not fear. Us. No cheers came, but heads nodded. A shift happened in that silence, subtle but deep. They weren't waiting on salvation anymore. They were it. By noon, Terry stood on the church steps, a clipboard in her hand. "I need deputies," she said. Ezra Pike stepped forward first. His massive hand swallowed hers in a firm shake. "'Bout damn time," he muttered. Lena Watts followed, then the preacher's oldest son, Micah. By sundown, 12 names filled the list. Shopkeepers, ranch wives, laborers. Not warriors, but no one in Dry Creek cared about that anymore. They wanted people who wouldn't flinch. Tara pinned makeshift stars on each one. They weren't official, they weren't shiny, but they meant something. For the first time since Clay died, Dry Creek had law again. But Crow wasn't done. That evening, just before dusk, a shrill cry cut through the fragile peace. Sam Pike, Ezra's youngest, was gone. His cap lay in front of the saloon, soaked in blood. Ezra collapsed, clutching the cap to his chest. The townsfolk gathered again, but this time the air turned sour. "You pushed them too far," a man hissed. "They'll kill that boy because of her," a woman whispered. Tara heard every word. She didn't argue, didn't shout. She knelt beside Ezra, steady and composed. "They took him because they're scared," she said quietly. "Scared of us standing tall." Ezra's face crumpled. "He's just a boy, Terry." Terry stood slowly, brushing dirt from her knees. "Which is why we're not backing down." That night they rode. Terry and her deputies fanned out across the dark hills. They searched old mines, creek beds, and even the burnt-out ruins of a collapsed ranch Crow had used before. No sign of Sam, but they found something else. When they returned, Dry Creek stood waiting, not behind closed doors, but gathered in the street. They didn't ask for reassurance. They didn't beg for guarantees. They simply watched as Terry dismounted, her face tired but unbowed. And when she nodded quietly to them, they nodded back. For better or worse, Dry Creek had chosen its sheriff, and they would face whatever came next. Together. Morning came bitter and brittle. Tara stood on her porch long before the first rays of sun broke over Dry Creek. She hadn't slept. None of them had. The search for Sam had ended in failure, leaving the boy's blood-streaked cap as the only evidence of his fate. But no one said it aloud, because if they spoke the fear, it would become real. The townsfolk gathered quietly outside Terry's home. They weren't armed. They weren't angry. Not yet. But they were nervous. "You said they'd leave," a man muttered. His name was Owen Feller, a shopkeeper who rarely spoke unless he smelled profit. Ezra Pike, eyes hollow from a night spent pacing his porch, shot back, "You think giving up now will save that boy?" Voices clashed, uncertainty thick in the morning air. Terry let them argue. Let them spill doubt and anger, because she knew they needed it gone before they followed her. When silence finally came, she stepped forward. Her face was pale, sleepless, and lined with resolve. "This town was already dead when Crow shot Clay," she said quietly. "You just didn't feel it yet." Nobody spoke. Terry's voice didn't rise. She spoke slow and cold, letting each word land like a nail in a coffin. "If we back down now, Sam dies. More will follow. They'll take what they want, burn what they wish, and we'll teach our children that cowardice keeps you breathing. Is that what Dry Creek is now?" Her words carved deep. Ezra nodded slowly. Then Lena stepped forward. "You've led us this far," Lena said. "We finish it." The others followed, not with cheers, but with grim acceptance. A town doesn't need bravado to rise. It needs purpose. And Dry Creek had just found theirs. Tara got to work before noon. She gathered her deputies, Ezra, Lena, Micah from the preacher's family, and others, and planned their next steps. Guns wouldn't win this war alone. Crow's gang still numbered nearly 20, scattered across the hills and old mining shacks. Attacking them head-on would be suicide, so Tara aimed for something sharper than bullets: starvation and distrust. First, she rode north. The McCullows, ranchers and longtime allies of Clay, owned the water rights and grazing lands above Dry Creek. Their wagons often supplied Crow's boys, whether willingly or under threat. When Tara arrived, her presence alone stiffened their backs. "They'll come for us," old Samuel McCullough warned. "They'll come anyway," Tara replied simply. "At least make them come hungry." By sundown, the McCulloughs agreed. No more food, no more whiskey, no more friendly deliveries. Crow's gang would feel the pinch within days. Next came the whispers. Tara knew men like Crow built power on fear, but maintained it through loyalty, or at least greed. Break that, and the foundation cracked fast. Lena and the other women volunteered without hesitation. They slipped into the saloon, playing the part of weary, charming company. They spread words like wildfire. "Wade says Crow keeps gold under his bed." "Crow told the others Wade's getting soft." "First chance he gets, he'll leave you boys to hang." By the week's end, Crow's gang was fractured. Brawls broke out inside the saloon. Knives flashed at card tables. Some rode off quietly in the night, unwilling to die for a man who viewed them as expendable. But Crow wasn't stupid. When whispers reached him, he struck back the only way he knew how. Violence. It happened on a moonless night. Trey sat alone in Clay's office, oil lamp flickering weakly as she reviewed patrol routes. The streets were quiet. Her deputies were home, resting. She should have felt safe, but instincts honed by weeks of tension made her reach for her revolver just as the door splintered inward. Three of Crow's men burst inside, eyes wild, guns already drawn. Tara shot first. The first man died instantly, dropping his revolver as he fell like a sack of grain. The second fired wildly, missing as Terry pivoted and sent a bullet tearing through his chest. The third hesitated. That moment cost him. Terry dove behind her desk and fired twice more. Blood splattered the office walls. The third man fled, bleeding and panicked, into the night. When dawn came, Dry Creek woke to find two corpses hanging outside the jail, displayed as a warning. Tara didn't hide what had happened. "This is law now," she told the gathered crowd. And law bites back. But not everyone stood behind her. Mayor Alden Briggs, dressed in fine silk he had no right wearing, stormed into her office that afternoon. "This has gone too far," he bellowed, slamming his hand down hard enough to shake her coffee. "You're no sheriff. You're a widow pretending to wear your husband's boots." Terry stood slowly. "Funny," she replied coolly, eyes sharp as barbed wire. "I don't see you stopping Crow." Briggs turned red. "I represent order," he snapped. "No," Tara corrected, stepping closer. "You represent fear." He blanched. Tara finished softly, yet deadly serious. "And as long as I wear this badge, fear doesn't rule Dry Creek anymore." Briggs left pale and silent. Word of their exchange spread fast. By nightfall, folks whispered not about fear, but about standing with Tara. Crow, however, was done playing. The next morning, a fresh notice hung in the saloon, painted in crude, angry letters. "High noon, one shot, sheriff or outlaw, end this." A challenge, a duel. Teray read the sign quietly as the town buzzed around her. Ezra begged her to decline. Lena pleaded. Even Micah, who had seen blood spill alongside her, urged caution. But Tara didn't argue. "I can't let Crow dictate how this ends," she said simply, adjusting Clay's old gun belt. "But you'll face him alone?" Ezra asked, pain thick in his voice. Tara's smile was thin, but unshakable. "I always have." High noon came with merciless clarity. The sun hung in the sky like a burning eye, scorching the cracked dirt and baking Dry Creek in silence. Shops stayed closed. Windows remained shuttered. Even the wind held its breath as the moment approached. Tara Reynolds walked alone down Main Street. Her boots scraped softly against the ground, each step echoing in the oppressive stillness. She wore no fancy clothes, just a plain cotton shirt, black riding pants, and her husband's old gun belt cinched tight at her hips. The badge glimmered faintly against her chest. Behind doors and behind curtains, the townsfolk watched. Ezra Pike stood stiff as a statue on his porch. Lena held Micah's hand tightly as if squeezing could protect him from what was coming. Terry didn't glance at them. She couldn't. This wasn't their burden. This was hers. Crow waited at the far end of town, standing near the saloon like a devil welcoming her into hell. He looked relaxed, a cruel grin stretching across his sun-worn face. Wade Briggs stood nearby, arms crossed. Sam Pike, the boy they'd taken, sat tied to a post just behind them. Dirty, bloodied, but alive. Teresa's heart twisted at the sight, but she didn't let it show. Crow tipped his hat lazily. "Sheriff Reynolds," he drawled, voice loud enough for the whole town to hear. "Didn't expect you'd show. Figured you'd send one of your little helpers." Terry kept walking, stopping only when they stood 10 paces apart. "No one else needs to bleed," she replied simply. Crow laughed, amused. "Bleed? You're a widow with a badge, darling. All you know is sorrow." Terry's hand hovered near her holster, not tense, not shaking, still, dead still. Crow's smile faded as he recognized that stillness for what it was. Certainty. The rules were understood. No countdown, no referee, no mercy. First to flinch, first to die. Crow flexed his fingers, his bravado slipping. Wade Briggs shifted uncomfortably nearby. The townsfolk remained hidden, breaths shallow and hearts pounding like hammers. For a moment, the world shrank down to two people and the dust between them. A fly buzzed lazily past. Somewhere a dog barked once in the distance. Then Crow twitched. His hand darted toward his revolver. A movement too fast and too practiced. But Terry was faster. Not by speed, by readiness. Her Colt cleared leather in a smooth arc and roared once, loud as a thunderclap across the valley. Crow's body jerked violently as the bullet punched through his chest, just above the heart. His revolver never cleared the holster. He staggered, eyes wide with disbelief, blood bubbling at his lips. "You!" He choked, but never finished the thought. Crow collapsed forward into the dirt, dead before he hit the ground. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then chaos exploded. Crow's men, what remained of them, bolted. Wade Briggs pushed two others aside as he fled toward the hills, leaving his fallen leader behind. Horses screamed as boots pounded away in all directions. Tara didn't give chase. She walked past Crow's body without a glance, moving straight toward Sam Pike. She untied him carefully, whispering softly as the boy trembled. Blood streaked his cheek, but he was alive. "It's over," she told him gently, lifting him onto her hip. By the time she turned, Dry Creek had emerged from hiding. The entire town stood in the street, staring in stunned silence. Ezra ran forward first, pulling Sam from her arms and hugging the boy so tightly it seemed he might never let go. Then one by one, the others approached. Lena, Micah, Owenfeller. They didn't speak. They knelt. Ezra went first, dropping to one knee in the dirt. Then Lena, then more, until the entire town bowed quietly before the woman standing alone with smoke rising behind her. Not because she demanded it, not because she was ruthless, but because Terry Reynolds, widow, outcast, forgotten, had faced death in the eye and did not blink. She had become the sheriff Dry Creek never knew it needed. And now, they would follow her anywhere. The dust of Crow's fall had barely settled before Dry Creek faced its next reckoning. With the outlaw gone, the silence he left behind grew loud. It was not peace, not yet. It was uncertainty. The town gathered that same evening in front of the church. The sun had barely dipped below the ridge, casting long orange shadows over the weary faces of people who had seen too much. Ezra Pike, bandaged and bruised from weeks of fighting and grief, stood beside Terry as she addressed the crowd. "No more gangs," she said plainly. "No more bosses whispering in back rooms. No more deals made with threats." The townsfolk murmured uncertainly. "What happens now, Sheriff Reynolds?" Lena asked softly from the front. The title fell naturally from her lips. Sheriff, not widow, not Terry. Terry didn't smile. She hadn't smiled in weeks, but she did answer. "Now," her eyes swept the tired faces, "now we make Dry Creek ours, and that means law, real law, hard law." Her rule began the very next morning. By sunrise, she had deputized 6 of her former volunteers permanently. Ezra became her right hand. Lena, whose resolve never wavered, managed records and disputes. And Terry? She rode patrol every day, without fail. She didn't ask for favors, didn't make speeches. She enforced rules without bias. When Tommy Voss, the stable boy, got drunk on stolen whiskey and fired shots into the sky, Terry personally dragged him into the new stone jail, rebuilt stronger and colder than Clay's old wooden one. When the Wilkes brothers refused to pay taxes for town upkeep, Terry nailed notices to their door and seized half their cattle when they refused. Harsh? Yes. Fair? Always. Dry Creek is for its people, she told Ezra one evening as they sipped bitter coffee on her porch. Not for bullies, not for thieves, not even for old friends who think they're above the law. Ezra only nodded. He knew better than to argue. But law wasn't the only threat. Opportunity breeds vultures, and they came fast. Within months, the railroad men arrived. Eastern suits with polished boots and silver tongues, promising prosperity. They offered to buy half the town. "At a generous price, ma'am," they assured Terry. Casinos, hotels, rail depots, progress. Terry met them in her office, 6 deputies standing quietly behind her as the businessman explained how Dry Creek could modernize. She listened, patiently, Let them finish every word. Then she stood slowly and walked to the window, where Crow's empty gallows still stood in the distance. A silent reminder. This town was paid for with blood, she said softly. The investors shifted nervously. I buried good men and nearly buried myself keeping it free. I'm not selling that. They argued, of course, threatened lawsuits and federal intervention. Tara didn't argue back. She simply gestured to Ezra, who opened the door and ushered them out. The train pulled out before sundown, and word spread far across the territory. Dry Creek wasn't for sale. Seasons changed. Years slipped by. The scars on Tara's body faded, but the hardness in her eyes never did. Children who once hid behind their mothers now called her Sheriff without fear. Farmers and ranchers stopped arguing about taxes when they realized their homes no longer burned in the night. Troublemakers still came. They always do in the West, but they didn't stay. Tara made sure of that. Some called her cold. Some said she was ruthless. But every night, as lanterns burned safely behind locked doors and children slept soundly through moonlit silence, Dry Creek knew the truth. Their sheriff wasn't cruel. She was necessary. And as long as that badge stayed pinned to her chest, no one, not outlaw, not tycoon, would ever own Dry Creek again. Years passed like whispers carried on the dry wind. Dry Creek changed, though slowly, the way old scars fade, but never truly disappear. Wooden storefronts became brick. Dirt roads hardened under the weight of years and wagon wheels. Children who once peeked through shutters during gunfights grew into men and women who rarely locked their doors. But some things never changed. Tara Reynolds still wore the badge. She never remarried, never once removed Clay's old star from her chest. Some said she slept with it pinned to her nightgown. Others whispered that she oiled her revolver every night before bed, even long after outlaws became rare as snow in summer. She still patrolled. Every morning, before dawn broke soft and gold over the hills, Tara rode the edges of Dry Creek. Dusty, no longer the spry gelding he once was, carried her faithfully down familiar paths. She nodded to shopkeepers opening early. She tipped her hat to ranch hands riding out before breakfast. The site became part of Dry Creek itself, like the old church bell or the windmill that creaked on windy nights. You didn't think about Tara Reynolds. You just knew she was there. But time, like the desert sun, wears even the hardest stones smooth. Tara aged. Her hair, once black and tied back in tight braids, turned silver and hung loosely down her back. The lines on her face deepened, carved by years of frowns and long, quiet nights. Her hands, once steady and quick, began to tremble. Not much, but enough. Lena Watts passed first, peacefully in her sleep. Then Ezra Pike, felled by a harsh winter cold. One by one, the faces that had stood beside her during Dry Creek's darkest days faded away. Soon, Tara was the last of them who remembered the fire, the fear, and the fight. Still, she didn't step down. Offers came. Young deputies, respectful and full of earnest purpose, quietly asked if she wished to retire. "Let us carry it now," they said kindly. Tara always shook her head. "This badge doesn't come off," she would say simply, tapping the star above her heart. "Not until the dust takes me, same as it took Clay." No one argued after that. Then one spring evening, the dust finally came. Terry sat on her porch, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, watching the sun fall slow and soft behind the western ridge. Dry Creek lay silent and peaceful. The children of the children she once protected played stickball near the old livery. Lanterns flickered gently to life along Main Street. She didn't feel tired. Not really. Just done. Tara's eyes fluttered closed as her hand rested lightly over the badge. Her last breath came not as a gasp, but as a sigh, soft as the wind that whispered down from the hills where Clay once rode. Morning came. Deputy Hannah Griggs, young, fierce, and the first woman Tara had personally sworn in years ago, found her. Tara sat still, lips slightly parted as if speaking one final word to no one. She was gone, but the badge remained, pinned firmly to her chest. They buried Tara Reynolds at the edge of town, beside Clay, under the oak tree whose roots tangled in the earth like old hands clinging tight to each other. The whole town came. No sermons, no fancy speeches, just stories. Stories of the widow who became sheriff, of the woman who faced down devils and outlasted them all. When the sun set that evening, the badge she wore was not removed. They buried her with it, by her wish, though she never said it aloud. Because in Dry Creek, law wasn't written on paper. It lived in memory, and no one ever gave the badge back. Could you hold the badge when the weight of the whole town rests on your shoulders? Would you stand when no one else dares? Tara Reynolds did, and Dry Creek will never forget her. Tell us in the comments, was she too cold or exactly what the West needed? Because legends only die when we stop telling their story.